So this flag is in sad need of being replaced, and taking it down today and putting up the new one. I wish I had a Canadian flag to fly today, but I'm going to put up another King's colors. But these are some truly crazy times we're living in right now, and that's to put it mildly. With all the rhetoric coming from the administration south of our border about Canada becoming the 51st state and calling our prime minister a governor. Well, there's a lot of insults on many fronts happening there, but this isn't the first time. So the wee bit of history that I'd like to talk about today is how it's happened. This is the third time, in fact. And actually last week, the New York Times, I think on March the 25th of this year, so I'm breaking from my 18th century persona and hopping into the 2025, the New York Times wrote an article called the truly terrible idea Franklin Washington and Trump shared. And I'd like to add one other name to that. That would be President James Madison. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. And a good friend of mine, I want to give a bit of a shout out to, because his turn of phrase in his songs is just phenomenal. So Richard Fortier, a fabulous musician and friend of mine from Nova Scotia, wrote a song called Lundy's Lane, which was the bloodiest battle on Canadian soil, and it occurred during the War of 1812. And one of the lines I'll quote from Richard's song was, "These Republicans are trying once again to liberate us quite against our will, so they decree." So I'm going to start with the American Revolution, because that's the first time it happens. And if we think about actually what's going to happen in my discussion, I'm going to bring out how the question of loyalty is going to come up over and over again. And the Americans are really going to test us during the American Revolution. So we've got the French and Indian Wars are over. America, the North American continent, I should say, is now Britain. And the American colonies now are faced with a decision. Are they going to remain colonies, or are they going to try to form a republic? Well, that question is going to be answered very quickly on the morning of April 19th, 1775, on Lexington Greens, where 8 American militiamen are killed by a group of British redcoats. I believe there's one casualty, and that's going to start an 8-year conflict. And I'm going to warm up by the fire and get a little more into this story. I'd like to preface my history by the hearth today with the fact that for 4.5 years or so that Kathy and I have been producing the Woodland Escape, we've stayed non-political. And today is not an exception to that rule. Essentially, I'm just giving history. This is what transpired. This is what went down. If we think about the start of this conflict, it's more than just a battle for the independence of the American colonies. It is actually a civil war, because when it begins, the colonies are all British, and we've got what we end up with are those that are loyal to the king. They were called Tories, and they were called a lot of things by the Patriots. And then we have the Sons of Liberty, or the term patriot starts to be coined. On the north side of the border, they're called rebels. On the south side, they're called patriots. That's all good. But their thinking at the time is that if they can convince the Canadian population, who are a long way from Britain, to join their cause, and in fact become the 14th colony. And today we use the term 51'st state. History repeats itself. That is a fact. But so they send Benjamin Franklin. Now, we know Benjamin Franklin historically as the venerable politician that was able to go to Europe and in France convince King Louis that militarily they should join this upstart nation or wannabe nation. He's very successful in that. He's successful in the negotiations of the Paris Peace Treaty, which will end the American Revolution, and the Americans have earned their independence. But he's an abysmal failure at trying to convince us, Canadians, that we should become the 14th colony. So he's an author of a manifesto that is sent to the King of England, but it's also sent up to the Canadas. So it's posted in Montreal, it's posted in Quebec, and about a month later, he goes up with an entourage of a couple other fellows. Now he's desperately ill. He's in bed 12 of the days that he's in Montreal. He said they were very quarrelsome, I believe was one of his quotes. But I'm going to read from the manifesto and give you a hint of what they're doing. So in it, they're offering friendship and, come join us. But they end it with, one can certainly take from it quite a bit of a threat to Canadians should they not embrace Americans and join the ranks. So it says, take a chance for embracing from a humiliating subjugation under governors, intendants, and military tyrants. It continues. It may look as though you're living as a free man, but this is simply a veneer. Your true masters are in London. A little further on in the manifesto, it says, you are a small people compared to those who with open arms invite you into our fellowship. A moment's reflection should convince you which will be most to your convenience and happiness, to have all the rest of the North America your unalterable friends or your inveterate enemies. So diplomatically, things are not going well for the Americans. Militarily, it's going pretty good for them. So after they take Fort Ticonderoga, which is a huge win for them, they're emboldened. They invade Canada, they take the cities of Saint John, they take Chambly, they take Montreal, and now they're on the doorsteps of Quebec, Benedict Arnold. And he's going to be joined in sort of a pincer move by General Montgomery. But Benedict Arnold's had a heck of a trip getting from the colonies up to Quebec City in the wintertime. And his men, half of them have either deserted or died from diseases. They're on the outskirts. Quebec City's been under siege. Montgomery arrives. But they got a problem because a lot of the men's enlistment time is going to run out on the 31st. So they decide, well, let's attack on the 30th before we lose all our soldiers. And it's a raging blizzard. And for those who have been to old Quebec City, you'll know the narrow, tiny streets with the stone structures and the cobblestone streets. And in this blizzard, in their attempt to attack fortified homes on the sides of these small streets, Montgomery is killed outright by a shot right in the forehead. Benedict Arnold takes a severe wound to his leg. And the Americans retreat. They had no choice. They were eating, according to diaries that I've read, they were eating dead dogs and boiling their cartouche belts for sustenance. They failed diplomatically. They failed militarily. And after the defeat at Quebec, they've retreated, obviously, but it could have gone differently. So we had, leading up to this, and it's a complex story and perhaps one for another day, but just briefly, we've got a merchant, well-known merchant in the Quebec area by the name of Thomas Walker, and he has a real hatred for British military rule. And he's going all about the countryside. He's fairly affluent. He's got the money. He's well known. He's putting up posters. He's trying to recruit people to join the cause with the Americans. And he's even offering free muskets for those that will take up arms. On the other side of the coin, we got a Francois Bébé, who was actually in the French and Indian Wars at the siege of Quebec, a veteran. And he's just the opposite. And he's trying to convince the French Canadians and the English Canadians that this is pure folly and that they should fight any efforts by Americans to take over. So that's the end of round one. Historically, of Americans trying to take Canada, and which brings me up to the War of 1812. Get a little more fire going here. So there's a lot of discontent by Americans leading up to the War of 1812, and that's also a full topic for another History by the Hearth discussion. There's a congressman, and his name escapes me, from Kentucky prior to the War of 1812, who said, I quote, "I shall not be contented until all British territory is incorporated into the United States." Thomas Jefferson is trying to convince Congress that timing's right. There's never been a better time to go to war. England's fighting Napoleon. He's looking at it as a bit of an opportunist. And his famous quote, he says, "It would be a mere matter of marching." And on June the 8th, 1812, President James Madison declares war in Canada. Now enter Sir Isaac Brock. He arrives in Canada. He's taking over the thing, but he's got a number of problems. First and foremost is he's got 1,200 troops to defend over 1,600 miles of border. So about 1.25 men per mile. He also has the problem, and it's going to get back to that, where do people's loyalties lie? Because we did an episode completely on the United Empire loyalists, and as you go to our playlist, you can see that and follow it. But he knows that most of the English-speaking people in Canada were just a very few short years ago Americans. They've got American cousins and brothers and aunts and uncles and friends, and they're doing commerce with them. They're trading beef and lumber, and back in the days when there actually was free trade. So he has to question their loyalty, and he's not going to know how that will play out for him at the start of the war. But very quickly, he shows that French Canadians, British Canadians, and British are going to fight against a common foe in that war. You know, growing up, my mother said you should always be positive. Find the positive aspect of anything. And so if I could find something really positive about the current state of affairs, it would be the fact that as Canadians, we're probably more united than we have been since the War of 1812. Anyway, I wish I had a Canadian flag to fly on Kelly Station, but I don't, so I'm going to get up my new King's colours.
Time was all Europe covered at Napoleon's feet, and only England that was guarding her from slavery and defeat. And the self-styled land of the free saw the chance to advance its own cause at the cost of Europe's liberty. I took the British side back in 1812 when the Yankees went to war on us, and so when doing went and did my duty as I saw it then, and joined the 104th New Brunswick Regiment. I was at Lundy's Lane, firing wildly in the dark. So many Yankees there, I couldn't help but hit my mark. I witnessed hell on earth a mile from Niagara Falls, in a hail of musket balls. Allow me to explain. I was at Lundy's Lane. That fool James Madison saw it was a matter of mere marching north to conquer us, or so it was, he said. But 2 years and more have passed, and we have made him rue the day in 1812 he cackled so before his egg was laid. These godless Republicans are trying once again to liberate us quite against our will, so they decree. But they have only this to be proud of: they have made themselves a whore in bed with the tyrant of Paris. And I was at Lundy's Lane fighting off their bold attack. They do this every year, and every year we beat them back. Canadians and British fought as one against our common foe in what I'll have you know was our most bitter fought campaign. I was at Lundy's Lane. In the night, lit only by the flash of musket fire, in confusion, somebody thick smoke and screaming of the maimed, I battled hand to hand for for hours I scrounged among the dead to replace my powder, flint and shot before the next rush came. In the churchyard amid the graves we met each fresh assault, till at length we gained the upper hand and forced the foe to yield. And as morning drew on we staggered up the bloody hill, and we watched in sheer exhaustion as the Yankees quit the field. And I was at Lundy's lane where our valor proudly shone, where 1 in 3 that took the field was dead before the dawn. And in only just 5 words, so simple as to be absurd, I could sum up the horror of all war and death and pain. I was at Lundy's lane